last chapter we're going to cover is chapter 16, and it's about solid and hazardous waste and how we both produce them and then what we do with them afterwards. So when we look at, we've got different categories of waste. Basically, we've got solid waste and we've got liquid waste. Solids are anything that's not a liquid or a gas in there. And then we have different categories of solid waste. Our municipal solid waste is what we produce at our houses. So most of the time, there can be some hazardous waste in this, but for the most part, this is like our food scraps and our paper and that sort of thing. Industrial solid waste is a little bit different because now we're looking at the byproducts of when we produce and manufacture things. So it still could be things like paper and cardboard and all of that, but we also have things more metals and concrete and things like that as well that are mixed in with industrial solid waste. To be considered a hazardous waste, it has to threaten human health or the environment. So it has to be something that's either toxic, we'll talk about what it means to be chemically active, corrosive, like it eats away at things, or it's flammable. So in this picture, I know the words are a little bit hard to hear, but solid waste are a problem in lots of places in the world. They don't dispose of them in such a way to not cause damage to the environment. And in this case, you're looking at a river. He's actually in a boat. He is collecting waste out of the waterway. And unfortunately, in some areas of the world, this is how people make a living. When we look at wasting our resources, there's a lot of stuff that's industrial waste. That's the majority of our waste. And then we have the smaller portion of that is our municipal solid waste. And most of that ends up in landfills. So I know when we look at that number, that 1.5%, that seems really little. So it seems like it maybe isn't a problem, but it still is, and it's still a concern. So we still want to work on reducing our municipal solid waste as well as our industrial solid waste. When we look at that paper, it breaks my heart that paper is one of the things that's the largest component of the landfill because paper shouldn't ever go in the landfill. We have ways that we can recycle paper, and then we can cut down fewer trees. We don't need to be putting it into the landfill. What's another problem is e-waste, and so e-waste because there's metals that are used within that and that are toxic or can be if they get into our water. It's really important that you don't throw your electronics away. They get to a recycling or refurbishment or something like that. Another issue that we have with e-waste is that we tend to sell it to other countries and then they just dump it somewhere. And so we're really just pushing our problem off on someone else. When we talk about integrated waste management, we're going to look at these priorities both for integrated waste management and for hazardous materials management. We talk about those as two separate categories because we want to handle those kinds of waste differently. So our integrated waste management, we're looking at primarily our municipal solid waste and our industrial solid waste that are not hazardous in nature. And these ones. So our first priority is always to make less. We want to stop the front of the pipe. We want to be on that front of the pipe side of things. We're producing less waste, so we're reducing the packaging. We're using less of a product or harmful products, making things that'll last longer, that can be recycled, that can be reused. There's a word that's called obsolescence, and that means that it becomes obsolete or like outlives its usefulness. We want to make items that don't have that happening to them. And then our second priority is an end of the pipe now. We look at what can we do with the stuff that we have? Can we reuse it, repair it, recycle it, compost it, that sort of thing. So that's our second priority, our R's in there. That first priority is really the refuse side of things. That's that we don't want to make them to begin with. And then all of our other R's come under the second priority. Because our last priority then is what do we do with the stuff that we can't do it with any of those other things with, and so we have to bury it or burn it or something like that. So we look at our R's, and we've all learned since you guys were little about what your three R's, right? Reduce, reuse, recycle are the three big R's. But what we really need to talk about are refuse and repurpose. So those are two new R's that you might not have thought about before. The refusing is saying that I don't need that. We look at some of the items that you have. Look around on your desk or in your backpack and look at how many pens do you have and how many pens have you bought since August. Do we really need all those pens? Or do we need things that last longer, have more ink in them, or something like that? A lot of times, the items are very cheap, and so we don't really worry about it. How many things have you lost? How many have you broken, and that kind of thing. Big difference between reuse and recycle are are another point that I want to make. So to reuse something means like I have a plastic water bottle and I refill it with water again, or I refill it with another liquid, and I'm using it for the same purpose, and I'm using it over and over again. That's reusing. We can reuse the item so I can have it for water, and then maybe I'm cooking and I have cooking oil that I don't want to put down the drain, and so I put it in. I put my cooking oil in there, and that's a reuse also. Plastic bags are another good example of that. To recycle means that we actually send it somewhere, it gets broken down, and it gets made into something else. So we're looking at we can reuse a water bottle, but we can also recycle that water bottle and we can make it into other things. Like I don't know if you've seen like they make pens that are out of recycled water bottles that you can actually still see the water bottle part on there. One time when my son was smaller, I actually bought him a pair of shoes that was made entirely from recycled water bottles. So it didn't look like water bottles, didn't feel like it looked like a normal shoe. The plastics that were in it all came from recycled water bottles. They can chip up tires and old tires, and that's actually what they use to make the rubberized asphalt with. So that's a recycling. So repurposing is where we use it for something else. So like I take that tire and I make a swing out of it, or I make a planter out of it. Something like that is I'm repurposing it or I'm using it for something else. So those three terms are not interchangeable, even though sometimes they get used that way. So you want to make sure you know the difference between the three. When you look at what you can do with solid waste, make sure that you're following your R's. And then a lot of it just comes down to the refuse. Really, that refuse becomes most of these things that are on here are the refusing. Refuse the throwaway stuff. Refuse to use the things that break a lot. Refuse to get the paper that you don't need. That kind of stuff. We talked about reusing a bit. So while it's important, it also can be hazardous. And we saw that picture of the man who was in the river with all the trash and stuff like that. It also happens in the landfills. This picture is from the Philippines. I had a student one year who was actually from the Philippines, and she would go and visit. These were everywhere. This isn't like a one-time spot or anything like that. This happens all over the place. So we have people who are living in poverty, and they have no way to make money or find things to sell or something like that. This happens unfortunately quite a bit. So looking at the refillable containers versus recycle or using the throwaway plastic, there's some areas in the world where you can't actually buy plastic bottles anymore. Some places where you can't buy plastic bags, that kind of thing. I know in our national parks now they don't sell plastic water bottles at all. They will only sell reusable water bottles, and then they have places where you can refill your water bottles around the park. So looking at ways that we can use refillable containers instead of those ones that get thrown away. Um, so when we look at the amount of, because some of this is about the amount of energy that's used when we can reuse it, as opposed to if we have to recycle it. So there's a lot more energy that's involved in things that can only be used once versus things that can be used multiple times. We talked a little bit about the reusing already. Make sure that and some of it's just, you can reuse your plastic bags, but if you're not going to reuse them, please make sure that you're taking them back to the grocery store. So when you look at refusing, once again, it's refusing those disposable things, using the things that can be used over and over again. So I was talking about this a little bit before with recycling. So there's the closed loop recycling, and that's where I take the plastic bag and I make more plastic bags out of it. Or I take the plastic bottle and I make more plastic bottles. I'm making the same product all the time. Secondary is more like the shoes that I was telling you about. So it's like taking the water bottles and making it into shoes. Talked about the asphalt a little bit. Cellulose insulation. They can also do this with jeans. I don't know if you've ever seen that before, with they'll recycle denim jeans and they can make it into insulation as well. Recycling. So in some places you don't have to sort them out, and in some places you do. So it kind of it's up to the preference of the city about whether they think that it's better to mix everything up and send it out. I know in excuse me, in Phoenix, we get most of our things in one can, and then it gets sorted. If you've never been to the recycling center, it's kind of cool. I would encourage you to go sometime. I know it sounds a little weird, but you can take a tour of the recycling plant. There's one right off of I-17. Where is it at? It's north of the 101, a little ways. But anyhow, you can go and see. In some places they have like I know my brother lives in Oregon and they used to have like 4 or 5 different recycling things. So they put their glass in one and their newspaper in one, and they would do the sorting up front. So it just kind of depends on the city. You're going to be doing an activity in this chapter about recycle city and how would you figure out the pay as you throw or the fee based kind of thing, and how would that benefit the community versus just putting it all in together. So we can also recycle our organic waste, and we can do composting as a form of recycling as well. Sometimes the plastics are hard. You'll see like the City of Phoenix gives you a chart that tells you which ones and has like the numbers on it, and you can tell which ones that you can actually recycle and which ones you can't. Unfortunately, some of the ones that are really hard, like they're very dense and the material itself is hard. Um, it takes a lot of energy in order to melt those back down again, and so part of the technology increase is trying to not use those kind of plastics, so that they can be recycled more easily. Um, so some problems with this is that once again it encourages increasing the amount of products that are being made, and it doesn't include the actual price. So like when you buy your plastic water bottle, it does not include the price of recycling it and making a new one, because there's a lot of tax out there. Some ups and downs. We talked a little about a few of them. Um, So when you look at the recycling, it always kind of cracks me up this one where it says that the landfill loses the money for the glass and plastic and things like that. But you know what? I would rather have them recycled. Just that's just the way it is because we want to remove that solid waste out of the landfill and things like that. Because eventually we're going to get to the point where we're not going to have the other place where we're going to put trash. We got to figure out a way to utilize the materials, and also once we utilize that, and if we throw it away, then that is no longer a resource that's available to us. And our resources on our planet are finite, so we want to make sure that we're using them in the wisest manner possible.